Welcome to the City Council Candidate Conversation with the Chamber of Commerce. I'm with Helen Grant, candidate for Ward 4. We're excited to have her with us today just to go over a few questions. Welcome, Helen. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, let's jump right into it. We've got a few questions to cover and looking forward to this conversation.
All right.
So just to kick things off here, what should the City Council do to boost economic development and quality job creation and retention?
It can create affordable housing. When we talk about young people moving away from Norman, we're looking at people who just recently graduated college and they need probably a break if they're paying back loans. And people want to live in the center of Ward 4 because there's so much going on. And a perfect example of quality job creation, especially in the times of COVID, would be cycling back to the people that we may have lost actually in our small business community on Main Street. So for example, Bigfoot Creative, where I used to work in 2020, folded, and our friends at Oscillator Press took over. And as a struggling new business in COVID times, it took them a while to get to the place where they could hire a graphic designer back. And even at the rate they're going, January is a slow retail time. So here you have somebody that's an Oklahoma college graduate of the art school who cannot live where he works, where once he used to. So I would look at what COVID has done to our current business community, and then looking forward to the future, I would be looking for businesses that want to come here to invest in our community and have living wage jobs, health insurance, the things that people need to be able to survive, and to encourage development that is responsible and with a mind to low impact development. As we were talking earlier about pattern code, I'm kind of excited at the thought of having some entry-level infill projects for people who may want to create like a 3-resident house that fits in with the character of, say, like houses on Lahoma or Chautauqua, and with a mind to what that density will look like as far as parking goes, because that was a question that had come up, is like if we change Main Street and Gray Street, what does that mean for businesses and parking? And I think with a robust transportation system, it's very charming to catch a trolley and go to the center of town. And I also like the project that's coming to James Garner, where there's supposed to be shop fronts on the bottom and housing on the top, and hopefully the people that are living on the top are people that work, live, play in the area. So
you mentioned pattern zoning, and I didn't realize that's kind of a new concept that Planning Commission and the Council is talking about right now. Based on your awareness of it, could you maybe tell everybody just a little bit of what that means, what that's about?
It's basically the council and the people that they asked to come in and speak on pattern zoning have recognized there's a gap for entry-level development for what they might call amateur developers, people who aren't architects and do this for a living, but people who might have the opportunity to kind of get their feet wet and maybe go on to expand more into development, but they might just have like a few projects. Like maybe their project is an Airbnb and 2 rental units. Going back to that house that would easily get pre-approved. So that's the thing about pattern coding that is so exciting, I think, because one of the conflicts I've heard around Center City form-based code is that if somebody doesn't want to follow the Center City form-based code and they want to do something more experimental, or maybe just something that wasn't outlined in the code, they are going to have to take some steps back, and it's going to take longer for them to get approved, so their build time is going to drag on, and of course, as was discussed, that costs money. So in this project, it may not be something like a hotel, like the Hotel New that was talked about, but it could be maybe a developer has some spots in mind in neighborhoods, and with a catalog of designs that are available, you don't have to go through a lot of talks with the city and planning, it's sort of already like fast tracking that process to get approved. So your build time and lead time is lessened, so that keeps costs down.
That's great. Well, anything we can do to kind of streamline the development process, I think would be well received.
Yeah, and
So-
even if they wanted to come back and do a variation on these things, it's still set up to be faster than what we have currently.
Very good. And that's forthcoming. So these are discussions that they're currently having.
Yeah.
So, okay, next question. This goes to a very discussed, talked about topic in town right now. So in the summer of 2020, our city council voted to reduce 9 police positions. We currently are staffed at 162 officers, authorized at 171 officers, and the voters have twice approved the public safety sales tax to achieve a total of 189 officers. So how do you propose to get us to a fully staffed department as approved by the voters of the city of Norman?
That is a trick question. Okay, well, technically the PSST can only pay for public safety, so that money should go on to hire those people. And as far as the decision to remove the 9 positions, they weren't filled. So when the NPD could possibly get candidates that qualify, because I've been paying attention to them talking about how hard it is to compete with surrounding areas. That was in one of the budget committees that was brought up. But that said, it's interesting because it's a opposing dynamic in a way, because you had people roll out and stay for an 11-hour budget meeting to talk about their issues with NPD. So there needs to be balance between the two. And right now there's 865,000 that is tied up in litigation. So I don't think anybody's really getting what they want right now, and it would be good to hammer out these issues and move forward so that we can meet the needs of everybody who came to the table in 2020 and 2021 around the budget. So
Very good. This question kind of goes back to our first discussion, particularly about development and that kind of thing. So, I think you mentioned, you may have used the term entry-level housing. I think I'm not sure, but maybe. So the council has discussed business registration fees, utility connection fees, and other fees on businesses. So what are your thoughts on these fees and your stance in general on business fees so that we can have a vibrant downtown, which is where we're at today, or other parts of the community?
Is this, just as a clarifying question, is this different than a business improvement district?
It is, yes. Okay. Yeah, these are
fees levied by the city more so than the business district on itself.
Yeah, currently there is not a blanket registration fee for a business to be in existence. There's been some discussion about that, and so that's another barrier. Wherever how small or large the fee might be discussed, that's a barrier. Utility connection fees are being discussed right now in light of the water rate increase that the city's going to put on the ballot. So just in general, what's your thoughts on these fees and impacts on businesses?
Well, in the interests of equity and whatnot, I would prefer like maybe a sliding scale situation. Some businesses are going to have greater usage than others. So like, just to throw it out there, if you were doing a marijuana grow, you're going to use a lot of water, and maybe your connection fee is going to be based like on what you intend to do. I know that for like a smaller business just starting out where the impact is not going to be as great, it may not make the same financial sense and may be a barrier to them getting started. I do think with the way that we're developing, and we have to be mindful about future growth and the amount of people that are going to come here, how we are going to give them services. So the water question is really good right now because we don't even reclaim or provide enough water, and we have to buy water from OKC and other places. So moving forward, that demand on water is just going to grow higher, and we're going to have to be able to pay for that water or invest in infrastructure that will reclaim it. And like gray water is something that's been talked about, and it's not just something that you could use at the house level. You could also be doing that in the business. But that said, I would want to look at connection fees and other fees on a sliding scale basis based on the type of business it is.
Okay. And keep in mind that, I think the utility rates, which we're all going to vote on, that's the part that goes to other people, that's based on usage. So in your scenario, a business that particularly uses more than a smaller business that doesn't, they're going to pay more on the back end.
I would say too, just to go back to the hypothetical marijuana grow, like the thought of having, they could impact, if we did have a sliding scale situation and they could show, well, we're using the least amount of water compared to others in our industry because we're doing these reclamation, all using gray water back into the system, not drawing as much, collecting water from rain. If you could show a demonstrable way that your model will not impact as heavily as it could, maybe that could be a part of the consideration process. But yeah, having friends in the new small business and COVID times and the thought of them like ponying up a lot of money, it is a barrier.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so you mentioned, I think you alluded to kind of a live-work-play scenario, particularly in downtown. So this question deals with that. Many of today's jobs are not static. People have choices where they can work and raise a family. So what's your plan to provide a quality of life that is second to none so that Norman retains its current workforce and attracts new talent?
I would say that good planning as far as like development, what kind of jobs you're trying to attract. And that goes back to planning, because you can, again, when we're talking about codes, it might be attractive to certain developers to come in and create the housing that will keep people, or at least give them an option to move into a neighborhood that might not be available to them. Like when I've gone door knocking in Ward 4, I've actually been surprised in some of the more wealthy neighborhoods. Like it may not be, people may not know this, but McKinley's like one of the better elementary schools and people want to be around there, but the older folks are like, we're kind of disappointed there's not newer, younger families in our neighborhood, which doesn't have to do so much with like, oh, young children are annoying, but these are people who are grandparent age. They want to see the type of connections in neighborhoods that you might ordinarily see if you didn't have maybe a wealth gap, because it costs money to have children. And I think with attracting business too, you do have to talk about education, and the quality of education. Norman has generally been pretty good, but we do experience issues with inclusivity and equity and diversity. There's actually a video right now of a child being bullied at one of the schools that has raised the hackle of a lot of parents. And when you're a business looking into places, you're going to be looking at the controversies that pop up in the Google search. So I think addressing issues like that that are actionable at the council level, because as you know, the council does not control Norman Public Schools, only the Board of Education. But there are things we could be working with the schools to do to improve education and fairness, which then in turn will attract highly educated folks to move into the area, because that's those quality of life things, especially if you're a family who might have a kid on the spectrum. You want to know that if you're going to a supposedly great school, that the lesson plan and the quality of the environment are not going to be detrimental to your student. So that's just a little bit of it. But also, I do think as far as downtown goes, it's great to see businesses like on the horizon coming in. I've heard of an art space that would like to buy property or rent property on Gray. When I've gone to places like Lawrence, Kansas, and I see how their downtown is more than one street and it's very busy, like even on not on Art Walk, I would love to see that in downtown Norman. But thinking of the other wards too, it would be good to see businesses that integrate into their communities that don't cause issues like stormwater issues, and are providing enough of a living wage that people do not have to move to the outer edges of town and commute in just to work at their job, unless that's something they want, because some people want to live in a rural ward.
Yeah, and thankfully the city has stormwater regulations now for new businesses, new growth that's happening, so that's in place. As we begin to wrap things up, we've talked about some big issues facing our community, but is there, or what do you believe is the biggest issue facing our community today, and what are your plans to address it? We may have mentioned it or may not. So
I think a lot of people are concerned with public safety, but the way to get there is very politicized right now. And I would just like to point people back to evidence-based policy. So like when we're going to look at homelessness, which is really affecting the downtown area especially, and even in my neighborhood and adjacent neighborhoods, it's mostly to do with the response that will help prevent the issue from like escalating and becoming a disturbance, but also seeing through resources that, okay, so when you look at the homelessness gaps analysis, it's going to say affordable housing at the very top is one of the things we're missing. And then transportation to services like mental health, jobs, counseling, those things are important. And I know we're talking about homelessness, but when we talk about attracting people to come here, wouldn't it be nice that, to go back to the family with the child on the spectrum who might have a bad mental health day and just like break down, if they're doing that in a way where you need to call services, your child is not being handcuffed and put into a police car and taken to counseling, which is currently the state way of handling transportation for mental health crisis. So with unarmed mental health crisis, in this scenario, your child would be picked up by somebody who's going to work with you and the child and then get them to where they need to go. So yes, we're talking about unarmed mental health for homelessness, but it's not exclusive to that. And then also a big issue in Ward 4 would go back to development. There are a lot of people who care about stormwater, but also the way our development downtown and in the surrounding neighborhoods will look. They have been very clear they do not want mini dorms for ecological and other reasons. It destroys the character of the neighborhood in their opinion. So to go back to that pattern code, I see that as a step forward to address the needs of the residents, but also maybe begin to get development that makes more sense in the area. And then the other part of that is I would like to see maybe more engagement from folks at the city level. I know that's hard to get, but another question that was posed to me had to do with committees. And somebody said that the mayor gets to hand select people on committees. The mayor can select people when the ward representative isn't in place to, but generally the way I hear it, and from my experience working on committees, they're always struggling to find people. But to address concerns of people who want to be a part of this process and don't get in, we should have a grievance process, so if they don't get selected for a committee, they understand why, and maybe the next time they put in for it, they're a better applicant that will get selected. Okay. So.
Well, as we wrap up, we're kind of to the end of our conversation. Anything else you want to share with our membership about your candidacy?
I'm very passionate about Ward 4. I've been saying the whole time, live, work, play. It really was why I chose, with my family, to move into this area, which I picked for First Courthouse because it had the same kinds of conditions I was seeing off of 23rd Street when I used to work in OKC. And during that era of my work life, I watched the Drake come into being, the tower finally get finished. I saw the adjacent neighborhoods start to have maybe some of those infill projects we were talking about where people were coming in and they weren't overhauling the lot to be something that the neighborhood wasn't. They were actually building to fit the character of the neighborhoods. So when I was looking at Norman, I was like, wow, Main Street's coming up. I think it was before that it got the Walker Arts District designation, but you know, when I joined Resonator, it was always in the back of my mind to convince the others to move to downtown so we could be in the footprint of Art Walk. So I would say I would like to balance the needs of the ward. And if you're voting for me, you're voting for somebody who is educated on the past city meetings, easily going back to 2016. And very recently, 2020, 2021, boy, do I know some stuff. So
Very good. Well, is there a way that people could reach out to you if they have any questions?
yes, you can visit helengrantward4.com, or you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, or helengrantward4@gmail.com. Or feel free to reach out to my campaign phone at 405-719-8404.
Awesome. Okay, well, thanks so much for joining us today. We
Thank
appreciate
you for
it.
having me.
Thanks to you for tuning in to this candidate conversation with Helen Grant, candidate for City Council in Ward 4. I want to remind everybody to get out and vote February the 8th. Thanks so much.